In early 2022, I received a message from someone I deeply respect. The message caught me off guard, and while it was a little long, there was one line that felt like lightning struck me. Those words were, "Would you like to consult on an official Evangelion project?" This led to a year and a half of work that gave me my first industry credit and the ability to say, I worked on Evangelion. The person who messaged me was noted anime historian and legend, Helen McCarthy. I'd met Helen when I was a teenager, and I attended a screening in London in which she was giving the opening address. I remember that screening very well, primarily because I felt very out of place. Everyone else there was an adult, and then you have 16-year-old me. When Helen arrived, most of the adults there immediately went to speak to her. I'm a pretty nervous person, which was even worse at the time, but Helen made an effort to include me. She didn't act like my opinions were lesser because of my age, and that was extremely kind in my eyes. I'd seen her again a few times at conventions, and she even signed my copy of Anime Encyclopedia and gave me some contact information. Over the years, we've spoken a fair few times. She wished me luck during my GCSEs, through college, then to my undergraduate, master's degree, and currently my doctorate. Having said that, it was very unusual for Helen to send me a direct message, so I was already a little skeptical before I opened it. I thought maybe she'd been hacked. I sat and read the message, and while I'm not going to read the message verbatim, mostly because I've changed phones at least twice since then, but the summary is that she had been approached by Kahara and Bunkamura with a proposal. They'd approached her because she is considered one of the most knowledgeable people in the world when it comes to anime. I say this with no offense intended to Helen, but she is in her 70s. I think in your 70s you're allowed to pick and choose what it is you want to work on, and if you want, you can just say no to everything and relax. With that in mind, and having previously worked on a similar project with one of the people involved, she decided to turn their offer down. They respected her wishes and asked if she could please recommend someone to take her place. That person was me. That's part one of why this message got my attention. One of the world's leading anime experts had declined to work on a project and instead was recommending me. Part two was one of the companies involved, Kahara. Kahara is an anime production company founded by Hideaki Anno in 2006. Essentially, Anno created Kahara when leaving Studio Gainax. In 2014, one of Gainax's most celebrated IPs was transferred to Kahara, completing the full transition. That IP is Neon Genesis Evangelion. In the span of one message, I'd just been told that one of the most celebrated anime experts was offered a job working with Kahara, and had turned it down, recommending me instead. I can imagine a fair few people watching this are thinking, what the hell do you know about Evangelion? I bet I could do better than that. And to be fair, you wouldn't be wrong. There is probably at least one or two people watching this video who could do a better job than me. But it didn't go to someone else, it went to me. So I think it's time to talk about Evangelion Beyond. The first person I spoke to was a man named Hisashi Ito. Primarily, he was my liaison between Bunkamura and Kahara. Hisashi was absolutely lovely, and I did apologize to him that my Japanese is absolutely terrible, but luckily his English was immaculate. Hisashi laid out for me that the actual project was. At the time, it was unnamed, but the idea was that the stage production was going to be put on, and it was going to be either an adaptation of or a reimagining of Neon Genesis Evangelion. The pitch Hisashi gave me also included the primarily creative city, Larbe Chekori. Mostly, I refer to Chekori as Larbe throughout the whole thing, just because it was easier for me to say, so I will continue to do it here, mostly to save people my terrible pronunciation. Larbe is an incredibly talented and well-known Belgian dancer and choreographer, and this is where Helen McCarthy came into it. In 2011, Larbe had worked with Helen McCarthy on a production celebrating the life and work of Isamu Tezuka, and that was shown at the Barbican in London, coincidentally the same place I had met Helen. In 2014, Larbe teamed with Bunkamura to create a stage production based on Pluto, a manga written and drawn by Naoki Urasawa and based on an Astro Boy story by Osamu Tezuka. Clearly, Larbe is an anime fan, and his next project was Evangelion. This was all explained to me by Hisashi, who gave me a few days to think it over before sending over the contact information for Larby. I looked at some of his previous productions, but at the end of the day, it was something I was desperate to work on, and when would I get this opportunity again? The next several months involve late night and early morning phone calls between myself here in England, Hisashi in Japan, and Larby in multiple European locations depending on what he was working on. My job was to take Larby's ideas for the show and make it fit within the world of Evangelion, then deliver an outline to Kahara for them to sign off on. During this phase, we assumed that we must use the same characters and terminology as the series, meaning that we had to take into account all of Nerve and all of the pilots. Originally, we called the project Evangelion Lilith, a nod to the angel that humans came from in Evangelion lore. The first element I was told was that the plan for the AV units and the angels was to be puppeted. I was very unsure at the time what this would look like, but after being sent some concept art, I did get a better sense of how it would appear. Obviously, this was still very early in development, so I was given some details and how it would be presented on stage. But it was during my first solo phone call with Larby that I learned a little bit more about the plot. To sum up how this first phone call went, my very first assignment was to kill Shinji. For anybody who's never seen Evangelion, Shinji is the point of view character. He's a 14-year-old boy who's suddenly summoned by an absentee father in order to pilot a giant robot and save the world from giant entities known as angels. Shinji has a reputation among the fanbase for being incredibly, well, in his own words, he's a coward, dishonest, sneaky, and a wimp. Personally, while Shinji can get extremely annoying at times, I do understand why a 14-year-old kid, suddenly told to fight monsters by his absentee father, might be a little bit unstable. That being said, when you're asked to kill Shinji, I'm not complaining. Larby explained that this wasn't going to be a retelling of the original series or the Rebirth films. Instead, this was an alternative timeline, much like some of the original video games, such as Girlfriend of Steel on the Sega Saturn, or some of the manga, such as the Shinji Ikari Rising Project or Campus Apocalypse. Larby wanted to do a version of Evangelion that was both approved by Kahara and used the universe to discuss current issues, namely environmentalism. Between the two of us, we decided that the primary blueprint we wanted to use would be a mixture of Yoshiaki Sadamoto's manga and the Rebirth series. Primarily, we went into the manga, but also included Mari, as we guessed that Kahara would want us to include their most recent addition to the pilot roster. Again, for anyone who doesn't know, the anime series came out in 1995 with a conclusion film in 1997. I'm simplifying, obviously, because otherwise we'd be here all day. And in 2005, it was announced that Hideaki Anno would direct a series of films that would retell the Evangelion story. This ended up being 4 films released between 2007 and 2021, known as the Rebuild of Evangelion series. Larby wanted to change the focus character from Shinji to Kaoru, now reimagining Kaoru as a fellow human pilot, allowing us to have a protagonist that had a bit more of a backbone, without having to drastically change Shinji. Larby didn't want it to feel like these characters had been drastically changed. It is an alternate universe, but it's still Evangelion. To do that, we had to figure out a way to either push Shinji aside, or get rid of him. Pushing him aside didn't feel right, so instead Larby decided that we should kill him. The question is, how do you do it? How do you make it add to the story rather than just a death for the sake of death? And finally, why? Why would Shinji die? I'm using this conversation as an example to you for just how in-depth we had to get with a lot of the choices. I've admittedly seen reviews people have written and even Reddit threads on it, and while it seemed to have largely positive receptions, it's always been my worry that people would think that it was just a corporate cash grab, or that it wasn't done with a love for the series. I adore the series, and it does mean a lot to me, and Larby is clearly a massive fan. When he was briefly home while traveling, I would end up with photos of Eva figures he had in his house just sent directly to me at random times. Every choice we made came from a place of appreciation, and I want to use the Shinji choice as an example of this. We took the idea that very early on, Shinji learnt the truth about the Eva and the angels, much like in the Rebirth films, where he finds out a good portion of the truth in what would have been episode 5 or 6. We thought that given how anxious he is and the mental state Shinji was in at the time, this sort of made sense to us, and we decided that the death of Shinji would be a warning to the other pilots, that Shinji wouldn't be able to handle the truth, and that while trying to explain it to the others, he would take his own life. Our original version of the scene did involve a gun, but where would Shinji get that gun? Larby originally suggested that he got it from Misato, but then in what situation would allow Shinji to take Misato's gun without her noticing? Instead, I suggested that the gun came from Kensuke, one of Shinji's classmates and friends. We know that Kensuke is a military otaku, something Toji and Shinji call him out as being, and after the second impact, it wouldn't be unbelievable that a handgun would be easier to get, unlike now where civilians can only get shotguns or air rifles with a license. This scene did end up taking place in a school, so at Kahara's request, we removed the gun. To keep it in line with the Rebirth films, we instead use a variation of the DNS choker from Evangelion 3.0. This scene became the inciting incident that sent Kaoru, Mari, Asuka, and Rei into further distrusting Nerve and looking to end the Angel threats and stopping a reliance on Avas that was just as destructive to the planet as the Angels were. Ultimately, the story would begin with a death and end with rebirth, much like the title for the recap film, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Death and Rebirth. The original series had 17 Angels, with the Rebirth films having 12, and given how little time the play has compared to a series or a few films, ultimately we ended up with 4 Angels. One that would represent the ocean, one to represent the air, another for the earth, and one for fire. Ultimately, this would stand for different ways in which humans have destroyed the planet. A big inspiration for this was the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and the aftermath at the Fukushima nuclear reactor. This was something Larrabee really wanted to comment on, and as such, when it came to the fire or earth, I suggested that it could represent the burning of fossil fuels, and oil in particular. Each of their designs also harkens back to an existing angel design, with the fire angel taking inspiration from Sachiel, air from Ramiel, water from Gakhiel, and earth taking very loose inspirations from Uriel and Leliel. Most of the work relating to the Avas or the angels' development was handled by Isaho Kaburagi, the other person listed with me for scenario assistance. This is largely because their design inspirations also included references to Oni masks and other Japanese legends and stories. Kindly, I was also sent their design briefs during the production, mostly because they wanted some of my input if I thought something felt like it was out of place for an Evangelion-related product. I've seen some sites complain that Sho Ichiro Matsuyoka was the one to design the Avas, but Matsuyoka was actually the one who took the designs and developed those into puppets, which yes, did change some elements to make them operable, but the original development work was Kaburagi. I still have his sketches to prove it. From here, the original story concept became that Shinji would learn the truth and his death would become the driving point for the other pilots learning more about the Angels' wants and what it is that truly powers the AV units. The point of view character would become a human Kaoru who struggles to understand both the truth of what's going on and navigate the world without Shinji. See, it's a common fan theory that Kaoru was in love with Shinji, mostly because he outright says it in the television series, but also because of his actions. Larrabee wanted to lean into this, not just because it would make fans happy, but as a gay man, Larrabee wanted representation that felt organic. As such, we wrote a scene in which Kaoru has a conversation with, I guess, the ghost of Shinji. We wanted to leave it open to interpretation as to whether this was actually Shinji's ghost or if it was all in Kaoru's mind. We took inspiration from a scene in Rebirth of Shinji and Kaoru playing piano together, but I did also point out that in the film Death and Rebirth, it sets up that all of the chosen children can play string instruments. The piano just ended up being easier to show. There is another scene with Kaoru that I do wish had made it into the show. It got as far as later scripts, but we had a scene that sort of called back to the manga. See, Yoshiyuki Sadamoto has this scene where Shinji and Kaoru meet. Shinji's sitting in the rubble from a recent battle and thinking about everything that's happened, and as he does, this malnourished kitten walks up to him. And while carrying the kitten, Shinji meets Kaoru for the first time as he's playing a piano in an abandoned building. As the pair go to leave, Shinji puts the kitten down, telling it to go home, even though it's very clear that this kitten is a stray and lost its mother. And when the kitten won't stop following them, Kaoru picks it up and snaps his neck. When Shinji argues, Kaoru points out that neither of them can take care of it. It doesn't have a mother, and if they left it there, the kitten would slowly starve to death, which would be a far worse death than a quick act of snapping its neck. That scene is very well known among fans of the manga, and what we chose to do was our own spin on that chapter. That after Shinji's death, Kaoru would go walking in a field, and while trying to collect his thoughts, he'd stumble across that same kitten. We had him debate doing the same thing, only to fall to his knees and comment about how unfair death can be. The scene would end with Kaoru taking the kitten with him, stating that he'd figure something out. From what I can remember, that was the only scene that was completely cut. I know it was the only scene that made it to later scripting phases that ended up being cut. A few months before launch day, I learned exactly where the stage production would be shown, and to my delight, it was the Kabukicho Tower in Shinjuku. More specifically, the Theatre Milano Z. This happens to be the same place that appears during the live-action portion of End of Evangelion. It was a very surreal discovery for me. I've seen End of Evangelion so many times. I've seen that theatre area, and thinking that something I had worked on was going to be in that same space was just, I guess, unexplainable. Along the way, we were asked by Kahara to change the characters' names and the name of Nerve. though still maintaining a connection to them. Their reasoning was that we could have a little bit more freedom and tell our own story while maintaining familiarity with the source material. I've seen reports on things like the Ava Wiki where a few characters had their names changed again between this decision and the final production, and yeah, that's true. I believe this largely happened due to the change in actors, and feeling that the original names we had didn't really suit the new actors. The joys of getting to change characters' names was that we could just do that. We didn't need permission. With this in mind, we rewrote the story, allowing for a little more flexibility. Nerv, for example, became Mensch. I've seen some people on Reddit comment that this was because Mensch is typically used by people of Jewish descent to mean that a person is a good, upstanding person, and that we picked the name as a way to symbolize that the people of the organization were working to be good people. I really like that idea, but it's not where we got the word from. See, all three organizations in Neon Genesis Evangelion carry German names, so Nerv, Gehirn, and Seele, meaning the nerve, the brain, and the soul. Mensch is just the German word for human. A sort of union between all three branches. The original phrase that goes around the Nerv logo was "God is in his heavens, all is right with the world," a phrase from a Robert Browning poem, Pippa's Song. The logo design for Mensch was something Larrabee came up with using the Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, and while the quote that we had came from Plato, stating the first and best victory is to conquer yourself, something that even outside the play is something that does really seem to fit the themes of Evangelion. The ending of the play now sees the pilots deciding to sacrifice the Avas to destroy the angels, putting an end to Japan's dependency on fossil fuels and moving towards a more sustainable source of energy, namely solar and wind, exactly what the angels were trying to tell us. As this is done, new life sprouts from the ground in the form of a tree, and the people of Mensch realize the harm they have done, with our version of Shinji, Toma, being returned to them at the base of the tree. The changing character names did greatly allow us to change aspects of each character. For example, Toma could be a little stronger of a character, less of a wimp as Shinji would describe him. Naoa, our version of Kaoru, could be a human being without us having to explain clearly that he wasn't an angel like Kaoru. If anything, Naoa became something somewhere in between Kaoru and Shinji. He was more proactive like Kaoru, but emotional like Shinji. Mizuki Itagake did a fantastic job playing him throughout, and to the point that I did see some people online unsure whether he was supposed to be Shinji or our Kaoru. The biggest change we made at this point was probably the one that would surprise Evangelion fans the most. We removed Rei. Larrabee gave me full range when it came to character actions and scenes, and I had the outline that Larrabee wanted and all of his ideas, and the things he felt most that should be in there. But there wasn't really anything for Rei to do. I consider Rei a very personal character to Hideaki Anno. She serves a very specific role in the original series, and was very popular with fans, leading to characters like her appearing in other series. But because of how personal she is, this meant that she largely became a background character throughout our story. The most I could think to highlight her and give, I guess, a little fan service was to include a scene where she listens to Kaoru vent. No grand gestures on her part, no grand speech from her. It would be a scene that showed a quiet understanding between Kaoru and Rei, a reference to how they are both the same in the original series and manga. With the freedom to change things and the knowledge that we would have a strict runtime, we decided that our version didn't need a Rei, that to just throw her into our story would be doing the character a disservice. I do apologize if this was something that makes fans angry, or they feel that Evangelion couldn't be Evangelion without Rei, but at the end of the day, I'd rather her not be in it than have done her a disservice. From here, our outline and dialogue suggestions were given to Kahara and Bunkamura for approval, and for full scripts to be written. I've seen a few copies of the scripts as it went through a few changes along the way, but the next job I had after that was to provide the actors with character dossiers. This included elements of the character that were carried over from Evangelion, and the core elements we wanted the characters to keep in mind. I decided to include quotes for each character, one that would be pulled directly from Evangelion, but give a good sense of who that character was. Some people had two quotes. For example, with Hinata, our version of Asuka, I gave Akane Sakanoa one quote that summed up how Asuka viewed herself compared to others, and another that showed her confidence. The quote I gave Shizuka Ishibashi remains my favorite, because I think it is the best quote from Misato and sums up our version, Iori, perfectly. It reads, "God knows I'm not perfect either. I've made tons of stupid mistakes and later I regretted them. And I've done it over and over again, thousands of times, a cycle of hollow joy and vicious self-hatred. But even so, every time I learned something about myself." When I finished those dossiers, I also sent over some notes for the script that Larbe and I had discussed that weren't explicitly mentioned in the outline. The one that comes to mind for me was Tunguska. When we discussed our version of the Second Impact, Larbe wanted something like that to happen, but one that was unexplained by the public and happened on a main continent. So I mentioned the Tunguska Blast, and the historical event became a reference point for the both of us. To my delight, one of the script versions has a photo of the Tunguska scar as a reference image. By the time Larbe got to Japan, they had entered the casting and building phase, and frequently I would get messages containing photos of the puppets being worked on, small video files that helped to convey ideas for set design, and drawings from Kaburagi. Sadly, I wasn't able to fly out to Shibuya, and it just wasn't in the budget, but as a thank you, I received the official booklet that was given to the opening preview guests, which I think has a few more pages than the pamphlet regular guests could purchase, as well as a video copy of the production that was shown in cinemas. That's where the footage shown in this video comes from. I was paid about £900 for my work, and was given a thank you on behalf of Bunkamura and Kahara, including from Hideaki Anno. In all honesty, I don't think Anno knows who I am. I don't even imagine my name went in front of him even once. But it's nice to think that in some reality he asked to send his regards. So that's it, the story of how I came to work on Evangelion. A few people know the story, and it was something I was really proud of. But what put a damper on things, however, was how my work reacted to it. I've said before that I work at a university, and I teach on an animation course to students working to become visual effects artists, game designers, animators, concept artists, and comic book creators. Because of just how well known our course is globally, I work alongside some incredibly impressive people. The head of our comics pathway is an established comic book artist in France, and has done concept artwork for Weta in New Zealand, plus other films like Thor: The Dark World and the cancelled Justice League Mortals film. Our head of the games pathway used to work for Rare during the Nintendo days. Yes, that means working on GoldenEye 64 and other cult classics. I was pretty proud to say that my first industry credit was part of the Evangelion legacy, and to tell my co-workers that I'd also contributed something to the world. They were fairly indifferent, which was to be expected given how busy they are. It was the higher-ups that made me feel pretty down about it. While the project had started in 2022, the first official showing of Evangelion Beyond happened just after I paused my PhD research for a year, something that was recommended because of my health. A few days after that showing, Hisashi and Larbe sent me reviews that had made it into the newspaper and from various outlets. It was received incredibly well, and I still remember the message Hisashi sent me, saying, "Always remember, you made this work happen." In academia, you're encouraged to work on outside projects while also doing your work in the school. It's a bit of a brutal system, to be honest, and in some cases becomes a bit exploitative. But given how we're encouraged to do these things, I sent those reviews to my boss, along with an explanation of what I'd been doing for the past almost year and a half, and I wrote about how well it had been received, that it was adding to the legacy of the celebrated series, and was a project that was possible because of cross-country communication. I added all the things I'd learned from the experience, and how it could be used to pair students who are interested in working across countries. The response was that I was clearly ill because I was wasting my time on something trivial, an illness that, by the way, I still suffer with, and have been before I'd even met Helen. It was only one email, but it did a lot to destroy any confidence I had about the project. Truth is, I probably would have carried on not sharing this story, if it weren't for the encouragement of my research partner, who wasn't even really an anime fan, and a conversation I'd had with a Discord group. See, because I do a lot of research around comics, I know a fair few comic book YouTubers. Some of us have a Discord. There was a conversation where someone used a GIF from Evangelion to respond to someone else, and I made a comment afterwards. And after a while, someone pointed out that I always seem to show up when Evangelion is mentioned, which started a conversation about Evangelion. When someone said I seemed pretty knowledgeable, I just said that I'd been a consultant on it before, not expecting it to go any further. Instead, they were really excited about it, and I joked that I would make a video about it, but I'm pretty sure no one would care. They reminded me that Evangelion is full of fans that obsess about the smallest details, and that an experience like mine is fairly unique, and someone is bound to find it interesting. So this is that video. I don't know if anyone did find this interesting. For all I know, people clicked on it to leave an insult and never watched the rest of it, but at least I can say it's out there now.